Welcome to the Backlash at Backlash.com. My name is Rod Van Mechelen, and in this video, in my continuing series on sexual harassment, I'm going to read from my extended treatment on the uniquely male reasonable man standard from my 1992 article, What is Sexual Harassment? The footnoted article is linked below. In this extended introduction to my book on sexual harassment, I introduce the aspect of hostile environment sexual harassment that all feminists want you to ignore, the reasonable man standard. You'll want to pay special attention to this, especially you college students, because I believe it holds the key for men to gain ground on the feminist campus assault on men. I'll explain why in the conclusion. But first, one caveat. I'm not a lawyer. This is just my opinion as a layman. But see if you don't agree with me. Now, hostile environment sexual harassment, the reasonable man standard, 1992, Bellevue, Washington. All men's rights may be threatened by the reasonable woman standard. What feminists don't see is that women's rights may be equally imperiled because, just as Ellison versus Brady established a unique standard for women, so it also established a unique standard for men. Should men be popularly persuaded that makeup, tight clothing, blouses that show any cleavage, and perfumes can be components of hostile environment sexual harassment of men, because these things can have the purpose or effect of unreasonably interfering with a man's work performance, then millions of women may find themselves targets for complaints of sexual harassment. This is fairly typical of what happens with the feminist issue of the day. In their desperate search for anything they can use to fan the flames of anti-male sentiment, they are reduced to grasping at straws that usually end up burning their fingers. Child abuse, for example, was loudly promoted as a feminist issue until it became widely known that most confirmed cases of child abuse are perpetrated by women. The feminist response to that, by the way, was, well, that has to do with opportunity. Women spend so much more time with children than men that, of course, they statistically end up abusing more children more often than men do. If men spend as much time with children as women do, they would be the primary child abusers. Hogwash. There's no statistical basis for that, just feminist prejudice. Bunch of sexist sows. Continuing. The reasonable woman standard may go the same route as, by a uniquely male reasonable man standard, far more women may be guilty of harassment than men. Do men feel harassed by the same things that bother women? Some do, certainly. But is this always the case? Or even generally the case? Let's find out. In the frequently cited case of Ellison versus Brady, which established what is known as the reasonable woman standard, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals held, in a clause that amounted to almost an afterthought and received little publicity, that where male employees allege that coworkers engage in conduct which creates a hostile environment, the appropriate victim's perspective would be that of a reasonable man. So, if a man claims he feels sexually harassed, it can be for reasons that women just don't get, in the same way that men just don't get it when women complain of sexual harassment. That phrase, by the way, men just don't get it, was coined by Congresswoman Patricia Schroeder back when Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill were duking it out on television. She was going around saying, men just don't get it, and feminists were going, yeah, men just don't get it. Well, feminists just don't get it either. We even have a more or less objective way to determine just how a reasonable man would define sexual harassment of men. According to Equal Employment Opportunity Guidelines, a hostile environment exists when an employee can show, 1, that he was subjected to sexual advances or other verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature, 2, that this conduct was unwelcome, and that it has the purpose or effect of unreasonably interfering with an individual's work performance. Now, of course, this is all about work performance and the workplace, but of course, since then, sexual harassment has been dragged out into all kinds of other places. And so, in my layman's opinion, it seems reasonable to figure that this precedent could be applied to campus life, too. Continuing, in the opinion of millions of men, A woman who wears a tight sweater, a blouse with a plunging neckline, libido-arousing perfume, a short skirt, tight pants, or cleavage-displaying bra is engaging in physical conduct of a sexual nature. Feminists say, nuh-uh. Sorry, feminists, you don't have a damn thing to say about it. We're talking about the reasonable man standard. Continuing, a reasonable man says that if men do not welcome such conduct from our female co-workers or female college students, and if it interferes with our performance, then far more women are guilty of sexually harassing men than the other way around. Just how many men would not welcome such conduct from women? That's what feminists say. How about those who know that if they notice such conduct and are seen to be noticing, or even are alleged to be noticing, then they can get into trouble? As Warren Farrell, author of The Myth of Male Power, points out, quote, "It would not be a big deal for most men if no one were making a big deal of the man's response," close quote. In other words, to a certain extent, the reasonable man standard, I'm having trouble pronouncing that word, will be defined by the reasonable woman standard. If feminists actually wanted to promote good relationships between women and men, I am sure they would have acted to block the creation of such a dichotomy, focusing instead on codifying objective standards rather than making it subjective. But then, of course, feminists thought they would be able to define those subjective standards, and for the past 25 years they've been right. Is that about to change? Well, that could be up to you. 2015, Olympia, Washington. The thing all men need to take away from this, but especially men in college, is that with all the feminist slut walks and women in college wearing clothing that when I was in college would have gotten them expelled, is that in my opinion as a layman, the Ellison versus Brady case provided the precedent for you to file complaints with the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or Human Rights Commission, or whatever applies on your campus, of hostile environment sexual harassment against the college for sexual conduct of your female classmates. Because remember, when it's the reasonable man, and not the reasonable woman, but the reasonable man, in the opinion of most men, women who act like that are engaging in conduct of a sexual nature. And feminists and women have nothing to say about it. Feminists will assure you that their conduct is not sexual, but they have nothing to say about it. They have nothing to say about what a reasonable man would consider conduct of a sexual nature. If past is prologue, then if college men follow through with this and win, feminists will retaliate by demanding that the courts or the lawmakers change the precedent or write the law so to make it objective but skewed against men. Now here's the thing. That would actually be okay. At least then we would have objective standards. And that's better than what we have right now, when the standards can be molded to fit the needs of the female accuser and the feminists' demands. Of course, any man who follows such a path is only asking for trouble. If one of you guys picks up on this and runs with it, well, you may render a great service to millions of other men, but you will almost certainly do great harm to your own life. I've been down that road, and let me tell you, it sucks. So my advice to every man starting college, ignore all the women. Interact with them in class, don't be rude, but don't flirt with them. Do not ask any of them out. Do not hook up with any of them. And under no circumstances should you look at any of them longer than 8 seconds. Otherwise, the Supreme Court says it's illegal ogling. What? You didn't know about that? I'll cover that in another video. That's all for now. Check out the other videos. Subscribe to the channel. For the Backlash at Backlash.com, my name is Rod Van Mecklin.